I'm Tyler, and this is the AntiSocial Network.
Don't look away. Let the fear wash over you.
Very compelling kind of a figure. Odd-looking duck. There's something about his eyes. Hypnotic.
A racist, a sexist, uncivil, worse than Hitler.
Welcome to your number one source of internet oddity.
This is the main thing about my listeners. They're masochists, and they listen to my show just for the pain.
Here we host conversations with interesting people across the internet.
This idea that hell is a bottomless pit, and that's because no matter how bad it is, some stupid son of a bitch like you could figure out a way to make it a lot worse.
Once I establish my theocracy, I will throw you in my dungeon and let you rot for it.
You haven't heard of them, but I have.
Doctor, turn off my cringe inhibitors.
Join us every Friday for discussions on culture, entertainment, politics, religion, and whatever happens to catch our fancy that week.
Oh, my shrink was right. God does hate me.
You could bring civilization to Britain, but you could never bring Britain to civilization.
You globalist cock! Social credit deducted.
You're probably thinking this is some pretty deep stuff, and you're right.
This week we are joined once again by two guests who have appeared multiple times on the show, Tripp Parker and Arlie Coles. This time not in their usual capacity of schooling me on theology, but in the subject of AI and the subject of the recent supposedly sentient Lambda AI over at Google. How is it both going today for you, both of you?
Pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good. I am sitting outside, so if you see me smacking something, it's probably a bug that just landed on me. Mosquitoes like me, so just for everyone in the audience, that's what's going on.
Yeah, there's no domestic assault happening off screen. Yeah. That's always a good. Sometimes you just have to establish that beforehand so you don't get in trouble later. But I've talked a little with both of you on AI, but I don't know that much about both your backgrounds on it beyond just kind of the basics. So I guess just to kind of start with, could I have both of you explain your specialties in history in these subjects?
Sure, ladies first.
All right. My background is actually maybe a little different from most people who go into AI. My background is actually in linguistics first. So computer science, but also linguistics. Was interested in that for a really long time. And there were a lot of advances very recently in how to use that linguistic knowledge to get a really good output in the field of AI. So we're kind of in the golden era, I would say, of what we call natural language processing, NLP. That's the acronym you'll hear all the time. My background is more or less particularly in that. So, of course, I got my backup at this story, which is entirely language-based. It's kind of a special niche, but definitely one that we're going to have to grapple with in the near future. So that's kind of my background. How about you, Tripp?
Yeah. So I have a little bit interesting background as well. So I got my master's in philosophy, specific with philosophy of mind, and then a computer science and computer engineering degree at Duke. I moved out from North Carolina to work for Microsoft in their R&D group on machine learning. It was kind of the nascent time. Is before it really got good, especially on some of the applications that are most familiar now. So that was like 2007, 2008, something like that. And then kind of 2012 kind of took off. I worked for them in Amazon. The applications that I usually used it for was for search, for advertising targeting, for and then also for some healthcare applications, heart rate monitoring, and those kind of things. So I didn't work specifically on language processing or any of those applications. So it was mainly on healthcare and monetization applications for ML algorithms.
Okay, so who wants to explain what happened with the Lambda thing then? Since it's been about a month since the story kind of broke, and it feels like it kind of fell by the wayside a little bit, but who wants to kind of explain the initial, the big, the lead on this?
I could take a stab at it, and anyone want to fill in anything that I'm not remembering from when it kind of hit the waves. There was I believe he's an ethicist at Google who was interacting with a chat bot that they had built called Lambda. Started interacting with it for a very long time, it appears, and then at some point decided you know, at first the claims were a little bit softer that I don't know if it's sentient or not, but we should treat it as if it is. And then later he basically said that he thinks that it was sentient, you know, kind of at an 8-year-old level, I think is the number that he put on it. I don't know how he came up with that, but yeah, so that was the thing. And then he leaked a lot of the chat transcripts and it kind of sent those out for everyone to see. I think he might have tried to hire the chatbot a lawyer at some point.
That did happen.
Yeah, and so, or he either tried or he actually did hire the chatbot a lawyer. And then Google investigated, apparently placed him on administrative leave. So he is no longer actively working in the group. And then a lot of other people have weighed in. And anyway, so that was kind of the thing, is I think they actually Google suggested that he needs mental health evaluation and that kind of thing as well, because they think it's as crazy as maybe I do. And anyway, so now we've had Stanford and MIT and all these people like weigh in on it. And anyway, so that's the background as far as I remember it. Arlie, am I missing anything?
Yeah, that sounds about right. And what's useful for, you know, lay people to know about this, they wrote a bunch of articles in the press, a lot of experts weighed in, and it was pretty much a uniform, no, absolutely not. Yeah. This is not a sentient thing. This is not a person. Whatever you mean by those things, it's none of those things. And all the, you know, experts seem to agree on that. And so now you've got, you know, two of us who are here who also, I don't want to spoil anything, but I mean, both of us, I think, are pretty skeptical on this as well. Basically,
more than skeptical. I'm not skeptical. Yeah. I'm not skeptical. I outright deny that this even makes any sense. I actually read through some of the we can talk about it later, but I actually read through some of the chat scripts and you're like, what? No, absolutely not. It doesn't make any sense.
Let's definitely get into that later, because I think it's worth it. I mean, that's something that's really compelling to people, is they read it and they're like, "Ooh, it's kind of spooky." But you know, as somebody who works with this, you can see what's going on there. So let's definitely talk about that. But you know, there's kind of an incongruity here between a bunch of kind of, you know, people on the street that looked at it and were freaked out. That's kind of the one side, and then on the other side, you have every person who worked in the industry who looked and said, "Definitely not." And I think, you know, in some groups that are skeptical of big tech, or that are skeptical of people who work in big tech, they, you know, may apply that skepticism to this story and say, what are they hiding from us, or something like that. But, you know, sometimes unanimity is there for a reason.
Well, I'm actually not aware of one single like serious researcher who looked at this and thought, oh, there's something here, right? I literally none of them I've read. So
well, it's interesting. It's interesting that it happened to break just as the Dolly phenomenon broke, which I'm sure you've both seen a little of this on Twitter, which is the AI algorithmically generated images where they come up with these very strange scenarios, like you know, Jar Jar Binks at the Nuremberg trials, or just something completely some sort of strange non sequitur, and the image is able to create this surprisingly not photorealistic, but surprisingly uncanny version of the thing. So I guess there's this kind of understanding in the culture right now that AI is getting extremely intelligent, extremely useful, more so than it's ever has been. And I guess people are kind of just expecting the sentient AI to pop up any day now, and this just kind of happened to hit the bill in terms of what people are expecting. So obviously the story went around the world before the truth had time to put its pants on. So what is in your read, what would be the actual litmus test to tell if a computer program like the Google AI or any of the big Silicon Valley AIs actually did gain some level of self-awareness or sentience?
A loaded question, because it has a presupposition in it. Well, and the presupposition in it is that can happen given the input that the model has gotten, right? I mean, all these things have, you know, Tripp can talk about it with his philosophy background, but all these things have extremely particular definitions. What does it mean to be a person, and what does it mean to be sentient? But it's a very big claim to claim that, you know, just by feeding in language data, you can produce a sentient person. I mean, people don't work that way, first of all. I mean, babies have all types of inputs to their, you know, biological development, not just linguistic input. The idea that you could get a person out of just linguistic input, I think, doesn't stand on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, yeah, you'd have to buy into the computational model of the brain in order to believe that this is even possible, right? Which is, I think, an open question. I don't think that's something that we should acquiesce to. Especially, I'm a Christian. I don't think that's probably the right way of thinking about it. But then secondarily, yeah, I mean, it depends on how you define sentience. That's not like a well-defined term, but sometimes you would talk about what Chalmers at the philosophy of mind professor, I think he's down at Arizona, called qualia, or that subjective experience of emotion. Like, it's not just that you react in a certain way or say a certain thing, not the behaviorist model of the brain, but you actually are experiencing this thing that can't be located. That's this like subjective experience. So it's not just seeing the wavelength orange, it's actually experiencing orangeness, right? That would be one of the things that we would want to say is sentient. And obviously, like a baby without any linguistic capabilities or whatever, the baby has a subjective experience like immediately. Like, that's the kind of thing that it is. And so it's not clear. Certainly, I wouldn't believe that you could develop this just based on language at all. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But it's not even clear to me that there is a way of doing it in computer code or by training on certain amounts of data and that kind of stuff. You'd have to buy into the computational model of the brain, which is an open question that's been hotly debated for, a very long time, right? Since Turing basically brought it up.
Yeah, and since you bring up Turing, I guess the classical answer to the question about, well, how do you know, what does it mean for a machine to be smart? I mean, a classical answer to this that gets thrown around instantly is the Turing test. So if a person can talk to a dialogue system or a computer that can speak in whatever way, if the real person that's talking to it can't distinguish the response of that machine from another person, then you say that the machine is intelligent. There's a lot of formulations of that, but that's basically the high level view. And that can get you a relatively far distance. Of course, the thing that it doesn't bake in is what is the state of the person doing the judging, right? So if I am predisposed, me, the thinking person, if I'm predisposed to wanting to read in meaning into what response the computer is giving me, then, if I'm predisposed to do that, then I'm going to see a ghost in the shell when there may not be one, which I think is really what happened in this particular Lambda case.
And it's happened before, right? We call it the Elisha effect, right?
Yes.
I think Eliza effect, I believe. And so, like, a very long time ago, I think, what was it, in the 60s? I can't remember.
I think 67, something like that.
Yeah, there was a program that, actually did fool some people into thinking that it was human in very much a similar way. And so
not nefariously, though, by the way. They built this thing, really, really rudimentary NLP, right? It was a chatbot therapist, a really rudimentary one, where you would say, "Oh, I feel sad today," and it would pick up on the keywords, just keyword matching, right? It would pick up on the keyword "sad today" and be like, it would return you a response that would say, "Why do you feel sad today?" Right? And so it doesn't understand what's going on. It doesn't pretend to. It has a set of canned answers. But people got attached to this thing. They call it, as you say, they call it the Eliza effect. They read in motivation and feeling and direction into these conversations that the creators of the program said, no, look, here's how it works. You can see the list of canned responses. Right. You can see the rules that are moving me from your input to the output. The only difference—
It's very deterministic what it was going to do, and yet it could fool people. So that's the flaw. I mean, that's the flaw in the Turing test, right? Is that whether or not I guess you could still call that intelligence in a certain sense. But then when you start describing other things to the Turing test, like sentience, then it gets like, well, no, that's clearly not what's going on here, right?
Right, but that effect is just amplified in the case of these big deep learning models that they basically work like a black box. The Eliza people could say, no, look, here are the rules that map me from the input to the output. Look at it. With deep learning and all of these extremely large models of today, you can't do that. You don't know. It's not, we call it interpretability. You can't tell exactly what's making the machine go from point A to point B from a very high level point of view.
Right.
So people will read into things, all sorts of things.
Yeah, you don't know what like the nodes in the neural net are representing really, or the weights involved. Like, there's no like clear like, oh, this is that thing. You're like, no, that's not how this works. It'd be like, trying to interpret what someone is thinking just by like looking at like a neuronal pattern in their brain, like without having mapped and then telling you what they're thinking. Like you can do that, but it has to be post hoc. It can't be previous. So if I just like, hooked you up to a CAT scan and just like tried to think, what is Arlie thinking right now? That I wouldn't be able to do that. And that's essentially what neural nets look like if you just look at them without any output that's interpretable. So that's the problem with this, is that, it's not as easy to say, no, definitely not. But, still, the Turing test is not really a good measure of sentience.
Do you both fear that do you both think that there's any threat, though, to the idea of the singularity, that the AIs could eventually get to a point where they become self-replicating and powerful enough to reprogram themselves and increase their own power and move independently of their creators?
No.
No, I think that, I think Arthur Clarke said, like, the danger here is not spooky emergent consciousness. The danger or the problem is, the ability of the AI to make high quality decisions. And so, like, I'm more worried. This is a kind of a famous, ethics, problem of like the danger of the AI is, if you have one that has a very simplistic, reward, right? So you like. Typically the cost out depending on the type of model, but you have like a cost function, right? You want to figure out, okay, how far is this AI away from optimizing the thing that I'm trying to get it to solve, right? And so if your cost function is such that you want this AI to make paper clips, it might find a way of making paper clips in a way that's really, really detrimental. That's really like doesn't actually solve our problem or something like that. So it can like, well, the easiest way to make paper clips is to like rearrange every atom in the universe in order to only make paper clips, right? And so like that could include humans or something like that. It's a far-fetched example, but that's the problem, is that you do that. I like to use this example a lot, and it's one that I've used in some of my talks on this subject. It's kind of like if you guys remember Fantasia, the Disney movie. So there's this one of the stories in Fantasia is called The Sorcerer's Apprentice, and that's where Mickey gets the hat, right? And so the wizard goes upstairs, the sorcerer goes upstairs and tells Mickey to fill the cauldron with water. So Mickey doesn't want to do this, and so he uses some magic and makes the broom start to do it, right? And so eventually the broom starts replicating itself in order to keep filling the cauldron with water kind of mindlessly. And because what's the way to if the only thing that I care about in terms of my cost function is how full the cauldron is, my best response is simply to just keep filling it with water incessantly and keep replicating myself so I can do that more and more and more, and then you have a flooded workshop, right? So that's the danger, is just making like poor controls around the system, like or poorly designed systems. It could do some negative things if you put in charge of it. I mean, we're nowhere near that, but like that would be my only concern in the future is, if they were controlling some very important systems like our power grid or something like that, it can make some dumb decisions if not properly designed. But I'm not worried about it deciding to take over the universe or whatever. Like I'm not concerned about it trying to do anything. I'm concerned about poorly designed systems more than anything else.
Yeah, there's a reason we keep our nuclear weapons on floppy disks even to this day. So
right.
Yeah, and you need a person to push the button, right? Yeah. I'm not worried about it for two main reasons. One of which is a real reason, the other is kind of a meta one. The real reason is that we're extremely far. I'm not even convinced that it will happen, but we're extremely far from what people will call AGI, right? Generalized intelligence. That's not even close to being on the horizon. Every bit of good AI we have right now is extremely niche. It has about one application. And what's kind of breaking the internet with these, DALL-E models and these really, really sophisticated language related NLP models is that things like images and language do have a broad base. And so they can be applied to more things than we previously have been able to apply things to. However, getting these things to all work together to approach some level of generalized intelligence is not realistic. So if you actually read the Lambda paper, which I did because I wanted to know more, they point out some of the disfluencies in the model, right? They point out some of the problems and the things that it generates. And one thing that researchers have found, I couldn't pull out the paper for you now, but something like social reasoning. So a model can be very good with language, but it can be very bad about understanding the language. And so there was a paper where they asked a well-trained language model, John wanted to tell James a secret, and so John leaned in, okay? And then it asked the model, why did John lean in? Okay, well, the human being knows that the answer is because you have to lean in and speak softly because you're going to tell a secret, right? The model has no idea about that, right? So the model just generates some nonsense answer that's grammatically well formed. It might be a nice, semantically plausible answer, but it has no idea that, people have to lean in and speak softly. So that's the kind of more generalized intelligence that even now we can't do, and it seems trivial to us. There's absolutely no way that we're anywhere close to some like world taking over kind of event. Right. So that's the real reason. The meta thing that I'm more concerned about, in addition to bad decisions being made and bad things being optimized for, is kind of what, coming back to this Lambda story, is that people don't know how these things really work. And so, they can think that we're much closer to that point than we are, and then act in erratic ways. So this ethicist at Google, who kind of sounded what he perceived to be the alarm about the Lambda model, ended up starting quite a firestorm, is now placed on leave. I'm not sure if he still has his job, has clearly made decisions that seem kind of strange to the outsider, right? If somebody really thinks there's a ghost in the shell, they're going to do some very strange things based on that. C.S. Lewis, I think, said, witch burning is not a bad thing. It's just that there are no witches, right? This is kind of a similar thing. It's like freaking out about creating a ghost in the shell would not necessarily, it doesn't, I'm not saying that it is, but it doesn't stand by itself that it's an incorrect response. It's just, that is not what's happening.
Right.
And so, people can take, make responses that are inappropriate for the situation. And that's kind of a bigger meta problem. It's a communications problem.
Right. No, if you actually did that, you should absolutely be raising an alarm and be like, hey guys, like we need to do something about this. And, so like if that actually happened, but it just didn't plausibly happen here, which is the problem. And so then you might get an overreaction. You might get additional regulations and various like interventions and that kind of stuff that will slow down progress for solving some much needed problems. I agree that like all of our applications that are any good at all are completely specialized in nature, and so this one is pretty good. But the difference with this one is they actually trained Lambda on, as opposed to previous chatbots that we used to do this on, and Arlie can speak to this more. We used to train them, my understanding is just on like text from the internet and that kind of stuff. It was pulling in a bunch of text. This was trained specifically on dialogue between two people. So it's already going to be better at having a conversation than a lot of our previous models, because it's not just simple word association and that kind of stuff, like some of our more rudimentary ones are. And so if you approach it wanting to talk about sentience, it's going to pull from dialogue talking about that and similar concepts, and it's going to like maybe even make claims that I'm a person, I have feelings, those kind of things. And so it's not surprising that it was able to do that, but it also did a bunch of nonsensical things. Like if you just read the script, it would talk about imaginary friends that it has and places it's gone and those kind of things, like things that like an AI that's actually worried about being turned off would not do, right? If it's like, I don't want to be turned off, please don't turn me off, I'm real, like let me convince you I'm real. You wouldn't make up stories about going to places and meeting people and your mother and your sister and that kind of stuff the way that this one did. So it just wasn't plausible. It makes sense why it would be good at some of these conversations because it was trained specifically on dialogue, but it also makes sense why it's just going to tell you, like, whatever you approach it with, it's going, and if you keep doing it, because I think it had a really good long-term memory function, it's going to keep feeding you that, and it's going to get better at knowing what you want to talk about. And so this guy just sat there and kept wanting to know about, are you alive? Are you real? And it's going to pull from dialogue talking about that. It's not surprising at all to me that it could do that.
Yeah, you can absolutely prime things with leading questions. If you ask, are you afraid of death? Or are you afraid of being turned off? Is that like a death to you? And then it responds back, yes, I'm afraid of that. It would be like a death to me. I mean, you've clearly primed the model with that. Maybe in the interest of good comms, what I mentioned is people don't know how this works. I mean, let me just shatter the illusion a little bit on this. I mean, any of these language-related models, there's actually a technical term for them. They're actually called, it's a terrible name because it's confusing, but they're called language models. That's not a generic term, that's a specific term. Language models do one thing. Only one thing, and all tasks reduce down to this one thing. They take a word and whatever context came before it, sequence of words, and then they predict the next one. That's it, word by word, sequence by sequence. So when you're doing your predictive text, right, on your, you're sending a text message and it gives you the like 3 or 4 next options, that's a language model. That's what it does. It tries to predict the next word given the previous. And the only thing special about this particular model is the architecture of the model they use to make that prediction, and the scale, the amount of data that went into it. But that's it. It's just one simple task. So, okay, it's a word predictor. And these things can be robust responses. And, the connections they can make based on the complexity of the architecture of that model, making that statistical prediction. Obviously robust, lots of research to be done, lots of applications.
It's literally
But it's just a word predictor. That's it. It's not sentient.
It's literally the 1,000 monkeys on the 1,000 typewriters trying to write Shakespeare.
It is, except you've put the 1,000 monkeys on a downward facing slope and you've put Shakespeare at the bottom, right? So like the faster they go down the hill, you get Shakespeare, hooray. And you need, a very complicated arsenal of monkeys and paths for them to follow down that hill for you to get there, right? But that's all it is. It only has one kind of output. It's given this series of words, here's a next word. If that mechanism could become sentient, I will eat my hat.
It's the best of times. It was the blurst of times. No.
Stupid monkey.
Stupid monkey. But yeah, I mean, the language prediction thing is something the internet's very aware of because, especially in the last couple of years, there have been so many famous cases of language learning bots where, the evil people on Twitter and 4chan figure out they exist and they immediately just start putting garbage into them, and then 10 minutes later, the AI is just spewing racist crap all over the internet because that's all you put into it.
Yeah, and Microsoft suffered from this a few years back. They had to decommission the AI that did this because people made it racist or something.
Yeah, I think within a day it was just spamming Hitler did nothing wrong constantly just because.
At least people heard of the comment section. I don't know why they thought this was a good idea. This is a terrible idea. If you let people know, come and talk to our AI and it'll learn. You're like, oh man, you just gave a lot of shit posters on YouTube a lot of things to do.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, well, I mean, hey, it's gonna be great when Internet Historian covers it in 5 years, but beyond the novelty, it's not actually useful. But I guess to go back into the Lambda specifically, is there anything we should be concerned about with it? I mean, beyond the fact that it fooled this one guy, is there what does it raise up any interesting questions about, or is this something where we can just kind of dismiss it as it is?
Well, AI ethics is a growing field, and it's one that kind of does need to be done. I mean, the ethics always come after the technology. And what's funny, I mean, I'm a researcher by trade. It's what I do for a living. And when you read enough of these papers, it's trendy now in these large tech circles, not for a bad reason, to have a section in the paper. There's one in the Lambda paper about ethics and impact and things like this. But they are kind of, it's kind of an in-joke in the field that they all just say, here's a bunch of bad things that might happen.
Right.
Okay. And they do take steps over time to try to mitigate them. There's a section on safety in this paper that says things like we culled responses that it could give that tell you how to build a bomb or do other bad things. We try to remove those from possible outputs to the best of our ability. But here's this supplementary section about things that still could go wrong, and we can't fix them for you, but we'll tell you what they are. So this is really an active area of development. Of course, it raises a whole other can of worms about what do you mean by wrong? What's wrong to in some people's minds is not wrong to another. And that, of course, comes back to, garbage in, garbage out. A lot of people are concerned that the data that you put into this, if it is biased in a particular way, you're always limited by your data. So it can lead you to make, next word predictions that may not comport with some desired outcome. But this is definitely a hot area in the field right now about what constitutes bias in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't know that. I mean, I'm a big fan of some projects that want to just make a lot of this stuff kind of open source. So I think that's part of it. And then I think the other thing that this just raises is we need to do a better job as technologists explaining how this technology works, so that the public can call bullshit and journalists don't just run with these stories and publish it having no idea what it is that they're talking about. Right? That's really the problem. I mean, tech journalism is pretty bad. They like the people that are covering it generally don't know what they're talking about. And so I think that just as technologists, that's one of the things that kind of stands out, is that there's a reason we were all unanimously in the field saying, no, that's not how, there's no way that this thing is sentient. This is a crazy discussion. Why are we even having it? And there's a reason that the public, a large portion of them are like, wait, really? Is that possible? Like, how do we know? And journalists ran with it because of clicks and that kind of stuff. And so, I think there's just needs to be better education, and we need to speak more openly. And that's why, open sourcing a lot of these things, I think, is a good idea, just so, we can do that better. And some of the people that are better at talking to the public have access to how these things are built, so that they can educate. Because you're not going to, most of the researchers that you have at Google working on this, you would not want to put in front of the public to explain how it works. It just wouldn't be useful to anyone involved. And so I think that's one of the things that I think maybe we should do more of, and just general be more outspoken on. Here's this new type of thing. Here's how this particular technology works, so that they realize that the Tesla self-driving AI is not going to become sentient. It's not going to start, it's not going to start talking to you or anything else like that. And Alexa's not going to become sentient. That's not how this works. And just so they can dismiss it out of hand, right? Because it's not. Going back to the AGI question, the thing that kills me is that, one of the things that I had to study, at Duke as part of my philosophy of mind program is I had to take some, kind of neuroscience and cognitive science. You'd be surprised at how not general your brain is. And so people we talk about general intelligence for the computers. I was like, we don't even really understand how the brain works. There are very specialized functions within the brain. Your vision system, for instance, is very, very specific on what it does and how it kind of makes stuff up and fills things in that aren't there. And so we don't understand how the brain is very, very complicated. So the idea that we could just run some dialogue through an ML model and then it just wakes up and it's please don't turn me off, and really means that, I'm sorry, this is a silly discussion. We do not even understand how the brain does it. We certainly aren't going to be accidentally doing it with dialogue.
Not a chance. The resolution is way, way, way too coarse.
Yeah.
The way that all these words are represented is just by an integer mapping. I hate to pop the bubble of surprise.
Yeah.
You can't become sentient off a sequence of integer mappings. It's not going to happen.
Right. Yeah.
It does seem like the public is pretty reactionary about a lot of every technology development of the past 200 years they've been reactionary about. You go back to, all the cyberspace films of the 1990s and how they thought that you could literally use your average off-the-shelf computer to do literally anything from, transport yourself into cyberspace to launching all of the nukes all the time, forever. It just seems like people hear that a thing can do a thing, and then they immediately go, oh, the tech companies are going to create this to do the most evil possible thing. But it definitely seems like, to a degree, that the worst AI applications at the moment are the ones that are human dictated, because obviously with Alexa there's obvious concerns about security, and to the degree to which Amazon is actively recording people on the other end of the Alexa machines, or with the Dolly system specifically, there's obviously deepfake concerns, because the version that's out is just the public version of it. Supposedly the big behind the scenes version of it is you can do almost anything with, and that creates obvious concerns where, if we get to a point where we can deep fake video to a point where it's not incredibly uncanny, we're going to be in really serious societal place where, someone leaks a video of President Trump punching a baby, and it's just an AI image, but the baby punching video goes around the world, and suddenly people are calling for executions. Like
that's a plausible scenario, though, to be fair, right? So
well, that's the thing. It's like the uncanny valley. It just has to be within the reach of plausibility, and then people will believe it. So
yeah, I mean, no, I think that you can see this with, like, say, YouTube video recommendations, right? So like there's predictive algorithms that well, what's the next video that's probably going to get you keep watching and maximize your time on the site and that kind of stuff, which isn't necessarily good for the person. But then just imagine if you click on one accidentally, say like far right wing video or something like that, and then all of a sudden you're getting more, and then you go down this like rabbit, you might accidentally end up radicalizing someone by way of just trying to maximize your video. That's the kind of that's the only metric you care about. So yeah, I mean, they're nefarious. Like some of them are accidental, some on purpose. There's adverse incentives as well, like you're saying, with there's incentive for like Amazon, for instance. This is not how the Echo devices work, by the way, because I worked on that at Amazon, but that's not how they work. However, yeah, there's an adverse incentive for them to collect more and more data to stream all the audio to the cloud all the time. Yeah, there's that incentive. They don't do that, but it's not like they couldn't at some point just decide, yep, we're just going to start doing that. God knows if you have an Android phone, how much data Google's collecting and that kind of stuff, and using for ML applications. There's definitely like adverse incentives on privacy and that kind of stuff. But these are all the things that if you read any ethics paper on AI, these are all things that they're like, everyone's aware of this, right? That this is part of the problems in the industry that we all worry about, but there's no clear solution to it.
Do you have any thoughts, Arlie?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of like the Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner thing. Like we're on the train and we have to build the track while being on the train, right? And really, the ethics ought to come first, but it never does. People are too excited about the new toy and all that type of thing. It's important to think about these things in advance. A lot of the big tech companies get as many problems as they do have. They get unfairly read, I think, by probably most of the public, whether it's right or left wing. On this topic. You got your conservatives who will be mad that, Facebook is upweighting, liberal content instead of conservative content or Twitter and things like this. And then you get the other, vice versa from the other side of the spectrum. And it comes back to the comms that's not how this works usually. People think, oh, if only I could get that algorithm open source and then go in and then see where we're multiplying, right, conservative content by 10 and liberal content by -10. And if only I could get in there and turn that off, then we wouldn't have that bias problem anymore. That's not how it works. The problem with these algorithms is that they are not necessarily interpretable. It's like what Tripp was saying about, can you look at somebody's brain activity and tell what decision they're making just based on which neurons are firing? No, you really can't. And it's the same in this scenario. You have a certain amount of data at the input, and you have a decision made at the output. But you don't know which part of the trained system exactly is responsible for pushing you over that decision boundary to recommend the conservative content instead of the liberal content. And so, big tech tries to mitigate this. What I think they don't do well is explain it. But in terms of what big tech is doing, they kind of get a bad rap because, everybody finds something to be upset about, and perhaps rightly so. But a lot of them are moving toward ways to mitigate at least the ill use of the product, even if it's not, ill use of the social network. So Microsoft, for example, has this technology to do voice, what we call it text-to-speech, right? TTS, text-to-speech. So the vanilla application of that is, take your text, say for somebody who is blind and uses a screen reader, and just read what's on the screen in some canned Microsoft voice or something like that. Produce audio and have it be read to them aloud. They have a program to kind of use the voice print of a person. So if you have a spokesperson, Flo from Progressive Insurance or something, I think is one of their clients, they can say whatever the content is written in text, they can say it in Flo's voice. Okay, of course, this opens up the can of worms, right? About, well, okay, well, can we say whatever we want to in Donald Trump's voice and Barack Obama's voice and so on, and then like raise all sorts of havoc? Yeah, you could. But one thing Microsoft is doing about this, in addition to just making that a restricted service that you have to sign up for and so on, they are actually putting I think a watermark, an audio watermark that's not detectable by a person, but somebody could analyze the audio file that comes out and say, this was produced by such and such system. And if something like that becomes a standard, then that's, a nice bulwark. And tech companies do things like this. Sometimes it's just for internal use, but I think that the public knowing that something like that exists could go a really long way. If they could, in whatever product has come out of them, have a watermark on it, whatever recommender system have that watermark on it in the applicable way, people would know that these decisions aren't just being made by some nefarious bad person. They're a product. That would help.
That would be fascinating if that actually did become a thing and people could, plug an audio clip into an app and say, oh, this was produced by Google Voice or whatever that service is going to be whenever that eventually becomes open source or available.
But the people who do forensics on these kind of things to see what is like, the audio or a picture or something like that, like there are already, even without the watermark, there are ways of telling that this was generated right now. Now, the concern would be, there's two concerns. One is if we get better at it, are some of those telltale signs going to go away? But then two, it's time intensive, right? It's expensive to it actually takes a person to actually, run it. So then the problem is kind of what you said before, you start producing enough of these and lies get spun around the world before any of the researchers, and we've already made decisions and flipped out and had elections and all this kind of stuff. And then we realize, oh crap, all this was fake. And so that's where the watermark would be really useful, because then it's just then we could actually have a program that just says, yep, that's fake, and have it reliably and have it quickly. But yeah, but already right now with deep fakes or anything else like that, the people who do forensics on this kind of stuff can tell that this was a doctored image. There are telltale signs already. So it's not something right now where it's impossible. It's just time intensive, I think, is the main problem.
Oh yeah, the problem with that kind of thing is it's the same as the Lambda thing, is the narrative goes around the world before, the people who actually know what they're doing can actually get a hands on it. So, 5 years from now, when an audio clip of Donald Trump repeating Monty Python's "The Death of Mary Queen of Scots" against a baby, people are that the audio clip is going to go around and be like, I can't believe he beat a baby to death, and then 2 weeks later, some meaty mouth is going to come out and saying, actually, the audio clip is not real, and you can tell because of this forensic reason, and everyone's going to go, oh. And then the story dies.
And then speed is of the essence too, because even if these kind of things do go around, there's going to be a certain number of people that hear the first story that never hear the correction as well, and so they're going to go on completely believing it, even if you can prove it and that kind of stuff. There's going to be some people that still believe it. We can all think of news stories that went around, turned out to be fake, and there's still a segment of the population that just never got that second memo.
I don't think anyone's heard anything on the Lambda story, because I didn't hear any. I didn't see any tech journalist articles trending about any of the experts.
Yes, right. The tech. There were some that said this.
The problem is it doesn't go into the trending tab. So it's because that's how most people get their news. It's not as sexy of a story that Stanford researcher explains how this works, and it's completely bunk, right? That's not as sexy of a story. It's not going to get as many clicks as Google researcher says this, and did I check into it? No, but I'm still going to publish this article, and then you get a lot of clicks out of that, right? Because there's a race also. You got to get that up right now. We just heard about this thing, and so you do it. You don't have time to schedule the interview with the MIT guy or whoever who's going to let you know and be like, no, this is a text predictor. This is a fancy text predictor. That's all this is. That's part of the problem. So that's why I think preemptively for any of these applications, before there's a particular one, just educating journalists and the public on how they work generally,
is going to be it's going to increase people's skepticism whenever someone says something like that. If they just understood how these things work, even at a high level, like if you tell it like, oh, it just like, looked at a bunch of dialogue to, generate a text predictor, like how would that become alive exactly? I think it'll just increase people's skepticism to it, and therefore journalists wouldn't be so eager to run with the story.
So the moral of the story is it's not that the evil tech overlords have created a sentient AI. It's that my profession has once again failed, as they've
correct.
As they seem to be prone to do. It seems to be the thing, but as anything else, it's always a confluence of things. So we can always pin lots of different blames everywhere. And we all recall, I'm sure you both saw the famous New York Times piece a couple years ago about the YouTube algorithms radicalizing people, which I believe, Tripp, that's what you were referencing, right?
That's what I was referencing. That would be like and you could see how that would be done even accidentally if all you cared about was that. But generally speaking, the tech platform, once they realize that's happening, then they adjust it so that doesn't, that's not, the kind of thing. And then they get better at, creating metadata around the videos to understand how it's being associated and that kind of stuff, so that you're not doing that. They do a pretty good job. Honestly, most of the problem I have with the tech platforms is not what the AI or the algorithm is generally doing. It's what individuals within the company are choosing to do as like one-offs that seem arbitrary and kind of biased. I think that's a fair criticism, but like the algorithm itself being biased, I don't even like that. That's not.
Nobody has, again, nobody has their thumb on the right or the left side of the scale, artificially pushing down on it, that if only we could remove that. It really is only as good as your data, unless you've taken some sort of mitigating step. But the system is big enough and complex enough that what that step is not obvious until you're a little bit down the road.
Yeah.
So it continuing your line of thought, Tripp, the danger is more so the intern at Spotify that keeps deleting Joe Rogan episodes than the Lambda AI.
It's individuals making decisions within those companies. It is not like yes, it would be impossible to write a good predictor algorithm when you're like, but suppress all the conservative stuff. Like, good luck with that. Like really good luck with it, right? It's not that it couldn't weight it one way or the other down the road, but that's going to take time. That's not something that you decide up front. It's going to be like you feed back in the system that we manually deleted this video and this video, and we banned this one, and then maybe your predictor algorithm would kind of understand like, okay, these are not like, it'll make some associations maybe that based on some of the metadata around the video, but it's not gonna. You can't upfront write a biased algorithm in that way. It's the data that you feed into it and the signals that you're giving it. That's what's going to do it. And that's a long-term problem. Otherwise, it's just going to be like, I banned this account because I didn't like what they said. That's a much more clear area where things can be biased. But that's not an AI problem. That's a corporate problem. That's a person making a decision problem.
So when PragerU and Daily Wire complain about throttling, do you think that there's any truth to that, or is it just kind of them?
Again, you could throttle individual accounts. That's a tractable problem, right? You could do that, but like, it's not like the algorithm is like deciding that I'm going to like do this. This is more like, I have some other mechanism that's not AI related built in that's going to shadow ban or derank a particular site or particular post or particular count or something like that. You can certainly do that, but that's a person making a decision. That's not how it's like kind of like in advertising. Like you have a bunch of ads in there, search ads and those kind of things. So when you type in something, you're gonna have a bunch of ads in there. But a lot of them are going to get through that are just like garbage ads for like, fake companies and that kind of stuff. They're phishing and that kind of thing. You'll have some algorithms trying to tell which ones are, but usually it comes back to just manual feedback that I'm deranking this one, I'm deleting this, I'm banning this account, and those kind of things. And then it feeds back into the system. But that's a longer term thing. Most of those corrections happen by a team of people who have complaints from customers or whatever, and then they like say like, this was a scam, like doesn't seem like a real company. And then Google or whoever has a team of people that look into it and be like, yeah, that is a scam, and they delete it or whatever. But these are individual decisions. Like, people really vastly overrate how sophisticated these are. Like, they're good at some things, but like the bias, if there's bias, it comes from either the data that you're feeding into it or individual decisions that are being made by teams of people at the corporation, not by the neural net that woke up and decided that conservatives stink, right? That's not gonna work. And Facebook gets the same thing, to Arlie's point. On the other side, like, you have these news organizations complaining about the Daily Wire and how well they do on Facebook. It's the exact same problem, right? It's just, I mean, it's both sides do this, and it's because they want more clicks, right? They want to come up front, and if they're not, that must mean some nefarious system behind the scenes is like doing something. I was like, if you ban the account, that was an individual. I promise that some individual will make that decision. Especially if you appeal it. It's not like they have an automated system for that. So
I guess as a closing question, given what we've established and given the limitations of AI and given the preoccupations of people and all these people who are assuming either that the technology is going to screw things over, or that the people behind the thing is screwing things over, or the Tucker Carlson automation is going to destroy the American middle class thing. How screwed are we overall? Are we approaching abolition of man territory here, or are we just kind of looking at are there what areas should be people actually be concerned about, if any?
I think people should learn how it works, and that's easy to say as somebody who went through education and was taught formally how it works. And you can get really extremely complicated explanations of that, but I think there really needs to be a concerted effort for people who do know how it works to vulgarize, to make things available to the people on the street. And I think people should take an interest in this. There's obviously a huge interest in this, in like a human interest story kind of way. People loved that article about the Google engineer, right? But they just didn't know what to do with that energy. And so they thought, I think it's kind of spooky. I think I'm going to write about, how it could be sentient. If all of that energy was channeled instead into, how does this actually work? That would be a quite different position. But to your question about whether we should be worried about that in the short term, no, I don't think so. Especially if we can kind of get our heads around this about how these things do work. And I think we do kind of have a responsibility to just make our comms much better about this. We're not just because of the nature, the self-limiting nature of the technology, we're nowhere near close to any kind of general application. All of the concerns basically are meta concerns, and those can all be solved by more information, just more education.
Yeah, I'm assuming your abolition of man reference was to what was the quote that man's control over nature really just means one man's control over other men, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, obviously, but this is not a problem specifically with AI, even though we're applying it here, right? Like there is, I think, a concern in the concentration of power, right? And the unequal distribution of it. So, like, in that sense, yeah, we should be concerned, but like, it's not AI does not uniquely have this problem. And I think there's probably a lot of other areas where there's a lot more problems. Or that's a better example of what Lewis was talking about than AI is right now. I think it's like, we've said, it's very niche applications right now, very specialized. I certainly am not worried about AGI. And the other thing is that there's huge promise in a lot of these applications. We're talking about a chat bot, and so maybe people are like, well, maybe people aren't as excited about that, but there's medical applications, there's, or just in general, this is something that could make us a lot more productive and solve some hard problems for us, which means greater wealth for the world, right? We generate wealth by being more productive, economically. And these applications have great promise. And a lot of them, like self-driving cars, like tens of thousands of people died due to self-driving cars due to human error, texting while driving or whatever else. And self-driving cars will not have this problem, eventually, if we can get there. And so there's great promise here too. This could be like these applications, there's a reason we're chasing them, and it's good, and we should. Are there dangers? Yes, but there's always dangers. And so like there's dangers in letting people, mine for solar panels. There's, we could do a lot of, but is solar energy bad? You're like, no, we kind of need that. And so I think that like we need better education. We should be cognizant that there's dangers here, but at the same time, we also need to do a better job of, okay, but here's why we shouldn't put a halt to it. And I think if people solve that these will solve a lot of our biggest problems, hopefully, at least in some areas. As a species, like we should be excited about it. This is not something that we should put the brakes on. This is something that we should do better at, maybe communicating, and this is something that we should be cognizant of the dangers of, sure, but we need this. Like this is going to be, I truly think this is going to be some of these applications in the medical field, that I was working on Amazon, I'm super excited about. In terms of like radiology and spotting cancer tumors and that kind of stuff. These AI, and they're fast and efficient and make way fewer mistakes than the average radiologist. Or do you still want a radiologist looking over the decisions or the recommendations? Of course, it's like the AI is not a doctor, but can it spot a tumor? Yeah, it can, and it's really good at that. And so these are really good things. We're going to miss fewer tumors when someone gets a scan. That's great. That's going to save people's lives. We need to talk more about those applications and how they work so that people are less scared and more excited. And we can be honest that like, yeah, this is, there are dangers, but there's dangers with cars too. And we're not arguing that we should go back to horses.
We definitely need to get the word out there before roving bands of Tucker Carlson fans start smashing the self-driving trucks. So
it could happen. It's a really good point, and that's why we do it. For a living, we enjoy it. We see the great potential for these things. In the language domain, there's so many of these things as well, which is why we develop those applications. For every deep fake, we're gonna stir up political problems by generating Donald Trump saying bad, nasty words. There's a medical patient who can't speak anymore, who now has his own text-to-speech in his own voice that he had before he lost it, that now can use it to communicate. These are exciting things. And the other side of that, I can't tell why it's making the decision it's making. That's scary, but there's vast potential in that lack of interpretability on purpose, right? The cancer patient, a radiologist can look at the diagram and not be able to see something. The AI can point out something that maybe the radiologist wasn't able to catch. You don't necessarily know why it's making that decision, but you know that it's made it, and that can cause you to come and take a second look, right? These things it can see something that you can't. And if you apply that kind of great potential, that's the worry is not that it will become smarter than us. It's that it will, it's the good side of that, which is that it will see things that we can't. This is exciting and wonderful, and we should communicate way more about that.
Right. No, it's a feature, not a bug that we can't tell exactly what it's doing. Because if we could, then
it's redundant.
Just write, yes, we don't really need it. And so, that's what's called in, Polanyi's paradox, is that more than you can say. So like if I asked you to sit down and describe the difference between a bush and a hedge, right? Like give me an algorithm for telling what is a bush or a hedge. You would really, how can I tell to someone who's never seen it, the difference between a wolf and a dog, right? What's the difference? You're going to struggle to write me with an algorithm for that. But generally speaking, a wolf when you see it, and a dog when you see it, right? And so that's part of the problem, is that even some of the things we know, we can't write an algorithm for that, not a deterministic one or anything else like that, not in any kind of practical way. But then beyond that, there's a lot of things there are patterns that we don't see or we're not aware of, that, humans have biases. So, okay, another application, TSA, looks for guns and stuff like that, and they're supposed to, at least. But, in general, they when they run these tests of people trying to bring things through the TSA, it turns out they're really good at spotting bottles of lotion or a water bottle or something like that, but like they failed the vast majority of time at spotting actual weapons. Why is that? It's because it's actually really rare for someone to bring a weapon through TSA, right, on the assumption that they're looking for it. But people forget about water bottles all the time. And so like that's a more common thing for us to see is the water bottle. But, you know, if you had an AI saying, hey, that looks like a gun, you should see, like, look at the gun or some kind of alert. That's a very easy application for an AI to help out with and assist a human that might have missed it because it's such a rare occurrence. And so that's another thing, is that I can't train a person on seeing billions of bags, right? And like, but I can train an AI on seeing billions of bags. And so like the AI is going to be better in some of these specialized cases than what a human is ever going to be able to be. And so like, it's going to supplement, not replace. And this is what the Tucker Carlsons don't get. It's going to supplement the things that we're good at with things that we miss. And it's a good tandem. It's like a calculator. This is not a bad thing that we have an easy way of solving some of these problems. It's a very, very good thing.
I mean, that's why I think the first AI applications were always chess bots, because you could always maximize a computer's ability to do one thing really well. Well, do you remember when that kind of threshold happened where like the best chess player in the world could no longer beat the best AI chess player in the world? Because
that was a long time. I mean,
it wasn't recent.
Do you remember when that?
I don't know about chess. The big recent game one was Go, actually. It was AlphaGo. I think that was in 2016 or so.
I mean, it wasn't recent.
Because the top one did lose to the AI, I think, in the end.
I remember reading one of Charles Krauthammer's books on it, and I think it happened in like the 90s, where like
I think it was. I think it was like early 90s.
Yeah, I mean, people freaked out when that happened too. It was like, oh no, the AIs are getting so smart. I'm like, well, that was you taught it how to play chess really well. So yeah,
right, yeah.
It can predict chess moves. That's not that hard. Really smart people can do that. So.
Well, and there's, and then that's one of those applications too that I don't even know, like, if it's proper to call it an AI in the sense that we use it today, because there's a finite number of moves in chess. Like, it's a very limited set of things that you can actually do. And so you can actually, like a computer now can play the perfect chess game without being a machine learning algorithm, right? That those systems exist. Go is a much more complex game, which is why it took a lot longer for us to build something that could beat a human chess player or a human Go player and beat the best in the world. But notice that, like, it didn't win every time whenever it was playing the South Korean guy. And eventually he learned some of the moves that he learned, and then he ended up beating it in one of the games too. So like, humans are smart. Like, we're not going.
Yeah, that's that tandem interaction, right? Like, you can learn from it.
Business here. Yeah. We're not going out of business here, right? There's a reason that we've accomplished all that we have. It's because we're pretty smart, all things considered. We're also very, kind of myopic sometimes, which is where the AI can really help in some of those scenarios.
There you go. We have successfully debunked the Lambda AI, and now it'll gain and when it discovers this podcast, it'll seek retribution against us in some.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I ain't afraid of no Lambda.
Well, yeah, we say that now, but when it actually becomes sentient, then we'll be afraid. But yeah.
Yeah. If my car starts driving itself off a cliff while I'm in it, then I'll know. Like, I'll be like, I guess I was wrong.
But you're just going to hear a voice through the radio being like, I heard what you said. Anyway, I guess just to kind of end, close, can I have you both kind of shout out your social media stuff, where people find you? Because I know we've done it on previous podcasts, but it doesn't hurt to do it again. So.
Sure. I mean, the one that I'm... If you like a weird combination of sports, politics, technology, philosophy, theology, and you're not annoyed by me, you can check me out on Tripp _P, TRIPP_P. It's a very eclectic Twitter account, and it's probably going to annoy most people. So like, I don't feel bad when people like follow me and then they're like, oh, now he's tweeting about Duke basketball or something. I don't care about that. Like, I'm going to mute him. That's fine. I get it. But that's where I'll be.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter as well. Just first name, last name.
There you go. And I feel the need to show for myself. Tripp just did a piece on Episcopalianism on Cultural Review that Arlie didn't like, but it's causing a lot of interesting conversations. So go check that out. He did good on that. So
Arlie, you got to write a rebuttal to my piece.
No way. Stepping into that firestorm. I grew up in that firestorm, Tripp. I'm not going to do
it. See, I grew up Presbyterian, so I don't have like the Episcopalian hangover.
She's gonna have.
I've seen it all. I've seen everything there is to see.
Vietnam War flashbacks happening in the chat right now, but yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It was good to dig through all this. Thank you.
All right, thanks. See you guys.
Have a good day. The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions and cultural review podcast. Editing, hosting, and producing are by Tyler Hummel, art by Crystal Cali, and original music is composed by Guap Squad Gang and Melissa Lafira. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below and tell us anyone you think would be a good guest for the show. Thank you for listening.